Sequencing meaning and power. Why good solutions fail when power moves too fast. In modern governance, conflict, and institutional life, we often assume that failure happens because people lack information, goodwill, expertise, or power. But the P monograph, Sequencing Meaning and Power, begins from a different diagnosis. Many interventions fail not because the solution is absent, but because the system is not yet ready to receive the solution. The monograph states that contemporary interventions often fail because legal instruments, strategic incentives, and policy reforms are applied where agency is impaired, meaning is fractured, and legitimacy has eroded in those conditions. Even technically sound strategies are experienced as coercive. This is the central idea. Power must be sequenced through meaning before action can become legitimate. A policy may be lawful, a reform may be rational, a negotiation may be urgent, a strategy may be technically correct, but if it arrives at the wrong layer of reality or at the wrong moment in the system's development, it will not repair the situation. It will produce backlash, stagnation, or collapse. PI calls this problem missequencing. Missequencing happens when institutions act before the deeper conditions of agency, meaning, identity, and legitimacy have been restored. The monograph argues that many contemporary failures arise not from what is done, but from when and where it is done. The question is therefore not only what should be done, the prior question is what kind of action is legitimate here now at this layer of reality. The monograph introduces a layered architecture for answering that question. First, the PIE-MOEM framework maps the core layers of social reality: ontology, identity, meaning, and narrative. These layers explain why human and institutional systems cannot be governed as if they were flat technical problems. The monograph describes these layers as a minimal architecture of human and social reality, analytically distinct but dynamically interdependent. Ontology asks what is experienced as real, possible, or non-negotiable. Identity asks who are we and what continuity must be preserved. Being asks, what does this situation mean for us? Normative asks whose story is recognized and whose experience is excluded. When these layers are unstable, power cannot simply impose direction. Strategy presupposes agency. Agency presupposes identity and meaning. Where those conditions are damaged, strategy is no longer experienced as coordination. It is experienced as domination. This is why P distinguishes between therapeutic tools and strategic tools. Therapeutic tools restore capacity, safety, recognition, meaning, narrative repair, identity coherence. Strategic tools shape outcomes, incentives, rules, institutional reform, negotiation, enforcement, and direction. The monograph expresses the principle clearly. Therapy restores the ability to choose. Strategy shapes what can be chosen. Confusing the two produces harm. This is not therapy in the narrow clinical sense. It is a structural category. It refers to work that restores agency, coherence, dignity, and interpretive availability before strategic pressure is applied. The second framework is the issue ontology matrix, or IOM. IOM asks, what kind of problem is this? Is it effective, meaning-based, narrative and symbolic, legal and normative, strategic and material? This matters because problems are often misclassified. Affective pain is treated as non-compliance. Narrative exclusion is treated as a messaging problem. Identity fragmentation is treated as resistance to reform. Strategic tools are then applied to problems that are not yet strategic. The monograph warns that precision only amplifies harm when the category itself is mistaken. Better execution inside the wrong category does not solve the problem, it deepens it. The third framework is TTL, trauma, territory, law. TTL explains why some conflicts cannot be accelerated. When trauma collapses the future, when territory becomes symbolically non-fungible, and when law loses its coordinating force, ordinary tools of governance become unavailable. Negotiation may still occur, but it cannot transform the conflict.
Law may still be invoked, but it functions symbolically rather than operatively.
Actors do not merely disagree about outcomes, they disagree about what is happening at all. The monograph calls this narrative injury a stained mismatch between lived experience and authorized interpretation. It notes that actors may reject accurate information because accuracy does not compensate for exclusion from meaning. That is why fact-checking, public relations, and strategic communication often fail. They address information deficits while leaving narrative injury intact. The fifth framework is DIF, the Transformation Identity Framework. TIV asks, is the identity system fragmented? Is it ready for repair? Can it integrate complexity? Is it genuinely ready for transformation? The monograph's rule is simple. Identity must be repaired before it can be integrated, and integrated before it can be transformed. This is crucial. Many institutions demand transformation before identity is ready to bear it. They call for radical change in contexts where people or groups are still fragmented, defensive, humiliated, or unrepaired. The result is not progress, it is backlash. PI therefore treats transformation not as a moral slogan, but as a capacity-dependent outcome. This leads to one of the monograph's most important ideas, tool legitimacy. A tool is not legitimate simply because it is lawful, rational, well-intentioned, or urgent. A tool is legitimate only when it fits. The type of issue, the layer of reality, the temporal of availability of the system, and the identity readiness of those affected. The monograph states that a tool is legitimate only when ontological fit, temporal availability, and identity readiness are present. Failure at any point converts the tool into a source of coercion, regardless of intent. This is the structural ethics of P. Ethical failure is not always caused by bad intention. Often it is caused by bad fit. When strategic tools are applied too early, the system produces backlash. When therapeutic tools continue without strategic integration, the system produces stagnation. When neither repair nor structure is available, the system collapses. The monograph names these as the three primary failure modes of missequenced intervention, backlash, stagnation, and collapse. This is why P reframe failure. Failure is not only evidence of incompetence, it is not only evidence of extremism, it is not only evidence of bad faith. Failure is often a diagnostic signal. It tells us that something was applied at the wrong layer too early, too forcefully, or without legitimacy. The answer is not always more pressure. Sometimes the answer is cooling. Cooling is the structured reduction of intensity so that agency can return. It does not mean agreement. It does not mean appeasement. It does not mean abandoning values. Cooling means temporal decompression, symbolic de-escalation, and procedural restraint. The monograph defines cooling as a reduction of intensity along trauma, territory, or law sufficient to restore minimal agency. Only after cooling can re-entry occur. First comes narrative, re-entry, recognition, plurality, and reopened interpretation. Then identity re-entry, repair, integration, and restored capacity to hold responsibility. Only after that do strategic and legal tools regain legitimacy. This is the heart of the monograph. Legitimate change does not begin with power, it begins with fit.
The final chapter states that legitimacy is structural, not rhetorical. It arises from alignment between tools, layers of reality, and system capacity. The central ethical question becomes not simply, is this action justified? But is this action legitimate here, now, and at this layer? For democratic governance, this matters profoundly. Citizens may lose trust, not because institutions acted unlawfully, but because institutions acted out of phase with social capacity. Democracies that cannot cool under stress move toward exceptionalism, moralization, and coercion. For organizations, it means change management cannot simply impose new structures on unrepaired identity systems. For conflict transformation, it means negotiation cannot be forced where trauma has collapsed the future. For public policy, it means legal and strategic tools must not be used before meaning, agency, and legitimacy are available. And for P, it means governance must be understood as a discipline of sequencing. Not every problem requires immediate action. Some problems require classification, some require recognition, some require cooling, some require repair, some require integration. Only then does action become admissible.
The closing insight of the monograph is clear. In an age of accelerating crisis, fractured narratives, and declining trust, the temptation is to act faster, harder, and more decisively. But where speed destroys meaning, the responsible move is different. Slow down. Recognize the layer. Restore agency. Repair meaning. Sequence power. Because sequencing is not hesitation. It is care for the architecture of human agency. And in complex systems, legitimacy does not begin with force. It begins with fit. PII. Frameworks turn complexity into admissible decisions.